kind of start by thinking back to a concept that I aired earlier called the machine. And, there's this concept that humans want too much control over nature, and they use our extremely powerful technology more and more to do this. And sometimes it's called the machine. And like a lot of science fiction is kind of about like machines going too far, whether that's the Terminator or the Matrix. And so Tolkien is in line with this, even though he's writing about kind of way more ancient types of stories, but the same idea I think is here, which makes, even though Tolkien's kind of medievalist in some ways, he's very modern. In some ways he's even postmodern or meta-modern, as we were saying. And so you see garbage and you see waste. And when we saw Saruman, he was kind of doing genetic engineering of orcs and using technology to make new types of species, which were more powerful, more violent, more, we're seeing now, like the way there's a war in Israel, there's wars in Ukraine, like the way people do war now is not so much, it is partly with soldiers on the ground, but it's also with drones, which are like going around and like killing people, and you don't even like face the person that you're killing. And then you get killed by who? By a drone. Things are, the machine is getting very, very powerful. And what if we said, instead of a human soldier to go and kill the bad guys, assuming that they're bad guys on the other side, you said an AI to do it. And the AI, unlike a human, doesn't have to sleep, and it doesn't have to make a moral decision. It just says like, oh, is this a bad guy or a good guy? Kill him. And so who's making that decision? Anyway, so the machine becomes more and more powerful and potentially more and more destructive. I mean, it's also good. I mean, I like technology, I like medicine. But so let's look at some scenes from Tolkien where you see the negative part of it. And a lot of when they go through Mordor, the land of Saruman, is kind of like the image of the pollution and the waste and the power. Like it's extremely powerful, and it's basically so powerful it's about to take over the world. But let's see some of this waste. This is on line page 290. This is in the chapter on herbs and stewed rabbit. And so they're going through Mordor, the newer wounds made by orcs and the other foul servants of the Dark Lord. A pit of uncovered filth and refuse, trees hewn down wantonly and left to die, with evil runes, so the fell signs of the eye, cut in rude strokes on their bark. So they're ruining these trees for no reason. And he's scrambling, and he sees like another thing here. He stumbled on a ring still scorched by fire, and in the midst of it, he found a pile of charred and broken bones and skulls. The swift growth of the wild with briar and eglantine and trailing clematis was already drawing a veil over this place of dreadful feast and slaughter. But it was not ancient, meaning it was like recent, like sort of a year ago or a couple years ago. He hurried back to his companions, but he said nothing. He didn't want to tell them about this. So let's get out of here. Let's not look at this. And so you see, polluted water, and like, which is kind of a concern because they're just getting water from like the rivers. Like they don't have like a big backpack, they have little backpacks. And it's so they're facing this garbage, and later in the book, I'm going to jump to the next chapter. We'll sort of jump around a little bit. We see the effect on humans. The machine as it takes over humans. So this is on the chapter, The Forbidden Pool. And in this chapter, this is the Forbidden Pool, that's when they sort of catch Smeagol by the pool. The humans do. But they're talking about Mordor. Minas Morgul is one of the cities in Mordor. It used to be called Minas Ithil, which is, so when the humans first built it, the people like Aragorn's people built it thousands of years ago, or at least hundreds of years ago. I'm not sure how many years ago. A lot of years ago. But then the bad guys took it over, turned it into Minas Morgul. And they're looking at it, and he says, the valley of Minas Morgul passed into evil very long ago. And it was a menace and a dread while the banished enemy dwelt yet far away. And Ithilien was still, for the most part, in our keeping. As you know, that city was once a strong place, proud and fair, Minas Ithil, the twin sister of our own city. But it was taken by fell men whom the enemy in his first strength had dominated, and who wandered homeless and masterless after its fall. So there was men there, there was humans there, dominated by the enemy, by Dark Lord. It is said that their lords were men of Numenor. So those are like people like Aragorn. Those are like, people with a lot of culture and tradition. But they had that culture and tradition, then they lost it. How? They got corrupted by power and wanted more power. And lords of Numenor, who had fallen into dark wickedness, to them, the enemy had given rings of power. So there's the power again. And he had devoured them. Living ghosts, they would become terrible and evil. After his going, they took Minas Ithil and dwelt there, and they filled it. And all the valley about with decay. It seemed empty, and it was not so. For a shapeless fear lived within the ruined walls. 9 lords there were, and after the return of their master, which they aided and prepared in secret, they grew strong again. Then the 9 riders issued forth from the gates of horror, and we could not withstand, etc. So who are these 9 riders? These are the Black Riders. We didn't see that. If you saw the first movie or the first book, these were the first guys chasing after Frodo. And what are they? They're humans. What humans? They were kind of cultured, good humans, like Aragorn, people of his tradition, but they'd fallen into wickedness. Why? Because they wanted power. And so one of the stories that Tolkien keeps telling is this is one of the things in the machine. And so what is a Black Rider? And these were 9 humans who took rings of power. So the Dark Lord had his one ring, but he had all these other rings too. So he gave 9 to the humans. I think it was like 7 to the dwarves and 3 to the elves. So he's kind of getting control over all these different races. And once he gives them the power, so they're tempted because they want the power. So think about like our temptation, like, oh, I have so much power in my technology, in my capacity to like dig up oil and gas out of the earth and like create so many huge highways and cars and airplanes, which consume so much energy and so much power, and also the technological power that like the big tech companies have. And so they get that, but then they get corrupted and they become what? They become wraiths. And here's a kind of I was going to say theology, or philosophy or theology, or an idea here. And Tolkien was an Augustinian. Augustine was this ancient thinker, a Christian thinker, Saint Augustine, who had a concept of what evil is. And he famously said, evil is nothing. What? How could evil be nothing? Evil is clearly like very destructive, and we see like wars, and we see, you know, Israel and Ukraine, like that's not nothing. But what is he getting at here? And he's getting this partly from the Bible. Augustine was an African, actually, he was from North Africa, writing in like the 300s and the 400s. And his concept was that evil is the absence of a due good. A due, meaning there should be a good there, but it's not there. And so a human, is good, or any being, any creature that in the Judeo-Christian tradition, God made everything and it was good. That's what it says in Genesis. And he made the heavens, and he made like the creeping things, and it was good, and he made humans, and it was very good. But reality has this capacity for evil in this Augustinian tradition when it doesn't have the good that it's supposed to have. And so when a human becomes a black writer, they become what? Well, I guess we're drawing here. So if here's like a good old regular human, let's say, and they're, doing the right thing. They're like Frodo. They're like trying to fight against evil. They're, taking care of their friends, sacrificing themselves for them. That's good. But when someone turns evil, when they get corrupted by the desire for power, they become a wraith. And this is silly drawing here, but I think it's helpful to think about, like, in other words, they don't have as much material reality. And when you see the wraiths, they're you don't see them. They have this hood, and you don't see their face because there's nothing there. And it's funny, like when Frodo puts on the ring, he can see them, and then they can see him, and he's becoming more and more wraith-like. And so that's in fact, he's already been wounded because he's kind of on the road to becoming this. Because he was already stabbed by one of them, and he's getting corrupted by the ring. He's like, yeah, I kind of like this ring, and in the end, he's going to get tempted to keep the ring. So he's turning into a wraith little by little, and this is like a kind of an Augustinian theology where evil makes you less real. Like the more you choose like to dominate nature, to choose power over the good, you become less substantial. And I don't know if that like makes any sense to you, but it does to me in the sense that like when and this happens in different forms and different types of evil, but in a certain sense, think about how if you're tempted, let's say, to do something bad, mistreat people and get money out of that, to exploit them, like you're less in touch with reality. Like the good person is in touch with reality, and they face and reality has good and evil in it. And whether you're a Frodo and you're like, okay, I've got this task, I've got this mission, I'm going to face up to it. Whereas the evil person, the person who does evil, because there's no such thing as a purely evil. I think all of us sometimes do evil. And when I do evil, let's say, like, because I sometimes do evil, like I'm like fleeing from reality. I don't really want to face it. I'll just kind of go over here and use this fake reality, whether it's my phone or like some other, like a drug or the ring, and so you become unreal. You become kind of like a zombie. And you see how this works. And in a certain sense, this gives a sense also, like, what are the orcs? The orcs are kind of people who've sort of turned away from reality. They're kind of like in this fake reality. that making some sense? Okay, so and let's look at another moment where they talk about the corruption of humans. This is in the chapter, The Window on the West. And here they're with a guy named Faramir. Faramir is Boromir's brother. We'll get into him in a little bit later. But as they're talking to Faramir, or Faramir is talking to them, and we're talking about Boromir's dead. And I'll just read a little bit. So he says, maybe, but tell me now of your own fortunes, said Frodo, turning the matter aside once again. For I would learn more of Minas Ithil and Osgiliath and Minas Tirith and the long enduring. Those are it's the city of Boromir and Boromir. The long enduring. What hope have you for that city in your long war? What hope have we? Said Boromir. It is long since we had any hope. The sword of Elendil, if it returns indeed, may rekindle it, but I do not think that it will do more than put off the evil day, unless other help unlooked for also comes from elves or men. For the enemy increases and we decrease. We are a failing people, a springless autumn. So they don't have hope. He's like, what? We're losing. It's just a matter of how long we're going to last. And you know, so there's a kind of dark realism here, which I can reflect on my own self. Like, is good winning in the world? And I don't think so. I mean, in many ways, evil seems to be gaining ground, and like the good and those who are trying to fight for the good seem to get weaker over time. I don't know, by being pessimistic. I think this is what Tolkien's talking about here. And now, at the same time, I'll you know, without giving it away, I guess I'm giving it away. Like, do you know who wins in the end in The Lord of the Rings?
Yeah.
The good guys. Yeah, so this is an optimistic story in the end, but they face these moments of like, whoa, we're losing, and like there's no hope, and like so it's kind of a mystery, like what's Tolkien up to here. Okay, so let's continue. It says the men of Numenor, that's the good men, like Aragorn, were settled far and wide on the shores and seaward regions of the great lands. But for the most part, they fell into evil and follies. Many became enamored of the darkness and the black arts. Some were given over wholly to idleness and ease, and some fought among themselves until they were conquered in their weakness by the wild man. So this is the same thing, like those 9 men who took the rings of power from the dark. It's like, oh, we want idleness and ease, we want pleasure, we want power. We want technology. This is, and you know, that's kind of what is that what our culture sort of sells us? What is our culture? And I guess whether that's what I call it American culture or Western culture, our culture says increase the technology. The more technology, the better. The more control, the better. Increase the wealth. The more money, the better. The more everyone's kind of cashing in, the better. Is that a summary of our society? And you know, there's a certain truth there, but certainly there's something wrong there. At least I would say this, and I think that's what Tolkien, because you need, like, where's like love, and where's like charity, and where's the common good? I mean, are those things things our culture values? Yes, I mean, obviously, many people and most of us value these things to some extent, but like, where is that taught in the university? Or should it be taught? I think it should be taught in the university. I think it should be taught like, as part of like learning. Like learning is not just about like making more money. I mean, but that seems to be and like, how often do the new smartphones come out? Every year. Is every new one so much better than the previous one? I mean, like, I don't know. It's like marginally a little bit better, maybe. But like we have this constant drive to get the new one. We'll wait in line and like, no, gotta get the new this and that. Like, yeah, this is our culture. Our culture tends towards like, we want more technology, we want more control, we want more wealth. That's what it means to be human. But Tolkien saying that's making us inhuman. That's making us into the machine. So, and that's what, you know, that's what the ring is. That's what these black riders are about. And here, continuing this description of these humans who kind of gave into corruption. Yet even so, it was Gondor that brought about its own decay. Gondor is the human realm, human kingdom. They falling by degrees into dotage and thinking that the enemy was asleep, who was only banished, not destroyed. Death was ever present because the Númenóreans still, as they had in their old kingdom and so lost it, hungered after endless life unchanging. Isn't that what we want? Kings made tombs more splendid than houses of the living and counted old names in the rolls of their descent, dearer than the names of sons. Childless lords sat in aged halls, musing on heraldry. In secret chambers, withered men compounded strong elixirs, or in high cold towers asked questions of the stars. And the last king of the line of Anarion had no heir. And so, endless life unchanged. We want like more medicine, more like, let's live longer. There's a guy named Ray Kurzweil who's like a big computer scientist, and you know, not a bad person, but he says, I'm going to live 700 years. What? Wait a minute. But he's like, okay, we've got all this medical technology, and there's a gene that says like, get old. Let's change that gene. Let's change our own biology, our own DNA, so that we can live 700 years, 1,000 years, forever. Why not? Because it's not natural. That's the ring. That's this desire for power. It's not respecting the natural flow of life and death. I mean, and I don't know. I mean, this is debatable because, like, obviously, some people think like, if we have the technology to live forever, why not do it? What do you think?
Yeah, I mean, first of all, I mean, like, if you were living forever, are your friends and family gonna live forever? So you're just gonna watch them die. They go over this in the story as well, like when the elf lady and Aragorn, her dad doesn't want her to date or marry him because she's just gonna watch him die. So there's that aspect of it, and yeah, I think life is pretty cool, but living forever doesn't seem. I mean, there aren't that many things in life, you know. It's not infinitely interesting, I would say.
Right. And so what you're referring to in the film and in the book, it's more clear in the film actually. Aragorn is human, he's going to marry this elf, she's immortal, and so her father is telling her, hey, don't marry him because then you'll be mortal and then you'll have to die and you'll like watch people die and you'll watch your loved ones die. But if you stay an elf, we're just going to live forever. And like, that's so perfect, right? Why don't you just stay with us? And she's like, but I love him. I want to have children. I want to die. and and like her dad doesn't get it, but she does, so she's married. But yeah, and so and Tolkien kind of meditates on like the reality of death by having people who can live, you know, like a normal lifetime, and people who can live kind of forever. And forever is not actually literally the case because, you know, but they still choose mortality in Lord of the Rings. And I think that's one of the messages is that if we ever get, and I don't know if we're ever going to get to that point. I don't know. It's possible. But even if we got to the point where we could like medically change ourselves to like live forever.
Yeah, it'd be pretty awful. Because I mean, if everyone lived forever, probably nothing would get done. We'd all just chill out and be like, I can get to it next year.
It's a hard, I mean, one of the things that makes like each moment precious is the fact that it's only a moment. Like if it can kind of like, and obviously like, you know, many people believe in an afterlife. Most people probably believe in some kind of afterlife. And I think that's great. I mean, personally, I like the idea of an afterlife, but that's not this life. I mean, like, to make this life meaningful, you almost need death. And then like, and like our whole biology and psychology for hundreds of thousands of years been developed by like us turning into parents, then turning into grandparents, and like watching our grandchildren, and like that whole sort of pattern and development, and like taking care of your grandparents, helping them die, like that's like natural and good for us. And it's not good. Like there's this guy, Ray Kurzweil. So right now, they're like taking AIs and like plugging in. So let's say, so Ray Kurzweil his dad wrote these books. So they put the books into the computer. So it's got his dad's consciousness kind of in the computer. And they could take his dad's image and his dad's voice, because they recorded it, and they take his dad's texts, and they can make a little hologram of his dad so that he can talk to his dad. And he can say, hey, Dad, how about the Astros? And his dad would be like, yes. I mean, his dad's hologram, using like the memories of books and articles that he wrote and using the image. And it's like, do you really want that? I mean, that's like sick. I mean, someone's dead. Let them die. I mean, that's very unhealthy psychologically to like be so attached to somebody who's dead that you like want their hologram. And there's like a wonderful Black Mirror story. Obviously, there's this and it's very dark. The Black Mirror story, I think it's like Be Back in a Minute or something, where the husband dies, so the wife orders a robot that has her husband's memories. And so she has the robot there. She's like, oh, I can't go on without him. So she has her husband's robot. And she talks to it, and she cuddles it, and she loves it. And it's like, wait a minute, this is really sick. I mean, anyway, so let's get back to the text. This is why I was running out of time. I was going on tangents, but okay, let's keep going. Let's go to I'm going to jump to the end because I'm running out. There's a story about stories, and let's look at this, where, because like there's a story, here's the story of your life, and you have the beginning, and you have the middle, and you have the end, and you're like, I know this, like, why you're telling this. But so a story has a kind of order. And are you and I in a story? Am I at the beginning of my story? Am I in the middle? Am I, hopefully I'm not at the end, we'll find out, who knows. Somewhere I'm in my story. And as I make sense of my life, I have to make sense of it as a story. Or mythos is the Greek word, from which we get like the word mythology and myth. Now, a myth is not a true story. It's like Zeus or Aphrodite or something. But just in terms of, it's got a plot, it's got a beginning, a middle, and end. And so in this scene, we're going to see just a moment where he's thinking of his life as a story, and then we're going to see them thinking about, like, what story am I in? Are we in a story? And then they start thinking about it, which is kind of like, because they're not in a story, they're a book. They're not real, literally. But yeah, so let me see if I can find this. Where they're seeing one of the wraiths. So one of the wraiths, I think back to the wraith guy, he's not physically there because he's become so corrupted that he becomes like a spiritual wraith. And Frodo is hiding from him, but the wraith kind of senses him because Frodo's got the ring. So there's a connection between the wraith and the ring, because they're both kind of on the same side. And so in this scene, Frodo's hiding. The wraith it's actually the Witch King, who's what, like the key wraith. It's the Wraith Lord. Maybe it was the ring that called to the Wraith Lord. And for a moment, he was troubled, sensing some other power within this valley. This way and that turned the dark, head helmeted and crowned with fear, sweeping the shadows with his unseen eyes. Frodo waited, like a bird at the approach of a snake, unable to move. And as he waited, he felt more urgent than ever before the command that he should put on the ring. But great as the pressure was, he felt no inclination now to yield to it. He knew that the ring would only betray him, and that he had not, even if he were put it on, the power to face the Morgul king. Not yet. There was no power or any answer to that command in his own will, dismayed by terror though it was. And he felt only the beating upon him of a great power from outside. It took his hand, and Frodo watched with his mind, not willing it, but in suspense, as if he looked on some old story far away. So underline that story thing. It moved the hand inch by inch towards the chain upon his neck. Then his own will stirred. So he's kind of talking about like this thing. So he's got this ring upon his chain on his neck, and it's pushing his hand closer to the ring, and he's letting it push, and it's pushing, but then he stops it, and it says his will took over. Then his own will stirred. Slowly, it forced the hand back and set it to find another thing, a thing hidden near his breast. Cold and hard it seemed as his grip closed on it, the phial of Galadriel, so long treasured and almost forgotten till that hour. As he touched it for a while, all thought of the ring was banished from his mind. He sighed and bent his head. At that moment, the Wraith King turned and spurred his horse and rode across the bridge, and all his dark host followed him, etc. And so Frodo has this moment of temptation, and the ring's there, and the machine is kind of like, I can get this power, I can get it, I can grab the ring and gain power. And he pushes it back, and then he reaches into his other pocket, and he gets the phial of Galadriel, which is a good object from Galadriel, who's a good elf. And so So this kind of magic, not magic, because Tolkien doesn't like the word magic. It's an elven craft. It's like this elven power. And remember, elven power is like it's in line with nature. It's taking nature and enhancing it, not twisting nature, not controlling nature. So the elves are kind of in balance with nature. So, and then we're going to see this file of Galadriel in the next scene where Sam and Frodo, Sam and Frodo are kind of making their way, and they're following Smeagol, and they're climbing the stair, trying to get into the Dark Lord's lands. And like every once in a while, they kind of stop and think about like, so how's it going? And because like it's pretty horrible. Like, you know, they're facing like the bad guys, and they're going to face them face to face, and they know there's orcs like right around that corner. And Sam, it's like, this is a pretty tough spot, Mr. Frodo. And Frodo's like, yeah. And then he starts thinking like, are we in a story? And of course you're like, yes, I've got the book here in the story. But it's this wonderful sort of thought about like, so how do we think about our lives as a story? And what kind of story are you and I in? Like, are you in a story? Like, and actually, are there good stories? Like, are you destined to have a great life? It's getting a little off topic, and I got to get back to this. And so this is getting back to Frodo and Sam. Like, are they destined? Does their story have any sense? Does it make sense? And it does. I mean, they've got this clear mission to kind of defeat the most powerful evil of their day, and they're on their way there. And this is on my page 360. This is the chapter of the stairs of Cirith Ungol. Cirith Ungol is the stairs are going up to the tower so they can get into Mordor. And let's see, there's a lot here, so I'm going to read just parts of it. So Frodo is saying, "Yeah, we're in a story," and then Sam says, should I share the screen? I'll just talk. Talking about adventure. So people think they're in an adventure. Are you in an adventure? Am I in an adventure? Is your life an adventure, or is it like this boring story? And so Sam was saying like, yeah, we're kind of in an adventure. And it says, yeah, people who are in adventure, but that's not the way of it with the tales that really mattered, or the ones that stay in the mind. Folks seem to have been just landed in them, usually. Their paths were laid that way, as you put it. But I expect that they had lots of chances like us of turning back, only they didn't. And if they had, we shouldn't know, because they'd have been forgotten. We hear about those as just went on. And not all to a good end, mind you, at least not to what folk inside the story and outside of it call a good end. You know, coming home and finding things all right, though not quite the same, like old Mr. Bilbo. But those aren't always the best tales to hear, though they may be the best tales to get landed in. I wonder what sort of tale we've fallen into. Are we going to have a good ending? Are we going to have a bad ending? Like, what kind of tale are we in? And Frodo says, I wonder. But I don't know. That's the way of a real tale. Take anyone that you're fond of. You may know or guess what kind of tale it is, happy ending or sad ending, but the people in it don't know. And you don't want them to. Isn't it interesting? So if you're reading a tale and the people know this is going to be a happy ending tale or a sad ending tale, that ruins it. You don't, and because why? Because like if you and I are in a tale, a story, we don't know if you're going to be in a happy ending or a sad ending story. But that's what makes it good. That's what makes it an adventure. And even Okay, let's keep going. And so then Sam says, "No, sir, of course not." Actually, I should show you this because it's kind of complicated. This is Sam talking about another story, which I need to explain to you. So let me show this. So Sam is saying, "No, sir, of course not." Beren, so this is another guy in another story. Beren now, he never thought he was going to get that Silmaril from the Iron Crown in Thungaradrim, and yet he did. And that was a worse place and a blacker tale than ours, danger than ours. That's a long tale, of course. It goes on past the happiness and into grief and beyond it. And the Silmaril went on and came to Earendil. So I'll explain all that. There's a lot of whole names, but there's basically a story there that he's thinking about, which is the backstory of Lord of the Rings. And why, sir, I never thought of that before. You got some of the light of it in that star glass that the lady gave you. Why, to think of it, we're in the same tale still. It's going on. Don't the great tales never end? No, they never end as tales, said Frodo. But the people in them come and go when their part's ended. Our part will end later or sooner. And then we can have some rest and some sleep, said Sam, laughing. He laughed really. And so let me explain Beren and the Silmaril. I guess I'll just do a little sketch here. So Beren and Luthien is a story of like thousands of years earlier in the Lord of the Rings, before the Lord of the Rings happens. And it's a husband and wife, actually. And they go into the land of the Dark Lord, Sauron, and they steal a Silmaril. And there's a book called the Silmarillion, which is based on the Silmarils. So these are these kind of elven crafty power things, kind of like the ring, or kind of like the vial of Galadriel. And they went into the Dark Lord's. So actually, what happened was Beren went to go get it, and he got captured by Sauron. So Luthien, his wife, went and saved him. And so they got out. And this is very parallel to who? Frodo and Sam, because they need to go into the Dark Lord's realm and destroy, not steal, but to destroy the Ring of Power. So it's exactly the same kind of pattern, where you have, in this case, it was a human and an elf who were married, so she became human, who were much weaker than the Dark Lord, and it didn't make any sense for them to go into there because it's like a fool's errand. It's like David and Goliath. You're fighting the most powerful guy out there, but they did. They managed to. In fact, Luthien actually sings and this kind of enchants Sauron for the moment, so he can't move, and that allows them to escape. And Frodo and Sam, similarly, they have no chance, but they're going to do it anyway, and they are in fact going to destroy the ring. So both of them are going to end in a good ending. And the Silmaril, which is this elvish, crafty object, has, for lack of a better term, this light inside of it, this natural light, which they're going to have, Frodo and Sam have, which is in the vial of the lady, or Galadriel. So Galadriel has the same light in this vial. So when Frodo's tempted to grab the ring, he doesn't grab the ring, and he grabs the vial of Galadriel, which they got when they went to visit Galadriel, which is the same thing. So they're basically, so like we're in the same tale. We've got the same story. We're in the same like good versus evil, and it's actually the same bad guy. He's still there, Sauron. And we're in this hopeless little guy attack on a big guy battle, and that's what we've got to do. So does that make sense? And so, yeah. There's a lot we could say here. Is it? Oh, it's only okay. Good, we got that. Because this class goes to 11:15. Yeah. Okay. Yeah, I guess. But I want to pause on this because what I want to say is, do you see your life as being in a story? And if you do, is that accurate or is that a lie? Because you could see, sometimes you see yourself in a fake story. Like sometimes you can even sort of justify what you're doing and say like, oh, I had to steal this thing because they owed it to me. You can have like a lie. So there are like lie stories, like fake stories, where I don't know, let's say, or take sort of a clear bad guy, like Vladimir Putin. And what's Putin's story? Putin's story is this: it's that the Ukraine isn't a country. And it's trying to be a country, but it's really part of Russia. So I'm just doing the right thing by invading it and killing a bunch of people because that belongs to Russia. Is that story true? No. So sometimes we tell ourselves false stories, like a lie. And sometimes America has lived lie stories, like, oh yeah, we're just like taking over the western part of the United States. And really, we were stealing it from the Native Americans. So yeah, it's easy to fall into a lie. So how do you know you're in a lie story or in a true story? Or do we know? Is it possible to know? I mean, it's always possible that we're in a lie story, isn't it? Like we might think I'm doing the right thing, I'm fighting against evil in the right way, but you might be on the wrong side without realizing it. Like America has been in the past many times. I mean, we've done good things too, like we fought against the Nazis and we fought against the Soviet Union, so thank God our country's not perfect, but at least sometimes it's been on a good side of battles. And sometimes it's really hard to tell, like even like the Israeli-Palestinian war, it's hard to know like which side is the right side. Like they've both kind of been wrong. So it's sometimes hard to tell. Now, but is there a fundamental story where you have good versus evil? Is that kind of a story that's sort of underlying all the other stories in some way?
I mean, I think that it would be more of a tragedy.
A tragedy.
Well, I mean, you got to think about it like the war. I mean, a lot of people have a lot of bad things that happen to them. So, I mean, if you look at it on the side of the victims, it's not good or evil, it's a tragedy.
Excellent, right. So another option is to not label it good or evil, that all the stories are tragedies. And that's in a certain sense true, because evil exists a lot and it does a lot of bad things in the world. I mean, is that true? I mean, I guess some people might say like, well, things aren't that bad, or like mostly the good win. What do you think? Is evil pretty rampant? Is evil pretty pretty powerful. I mean, it seems to me like you just look at the newspaper. Now, obviously, the newspaper is not all. I mean, it's like focusing on like just like this 5% of things that are happening in the world, and like they're all bad. If you watch the news, but there's a lot of good things happening in the world that we don't look at, that we don't see, obviously.
Yeah, I think the news is the machine, you know, because if
Excellent,
you're
okay.
always paying attention to the news, it's like the worst thing for your
Well-
mental health, I think.
That's an excellent thought. Let's just pause on that for a second, Jeremiah. And I guess I'm going to partly agree with you, because what is the news? And I'm thinking about like whether that's like any way we look at the news, whether that's from Instagram or Facebook or CNN or whatever, Fox News. They're doing what? They're making money off of our attention. They're not primarily interested in giving us the truth. I mean, I'm sure there's some good journalists who are trying, but like as far as those things make money, they make money not because they're good at giving the truth, but because they're good at getting you to click on stuff. And there's all this clickbait, and there's like this information that's not really information, it's like infotainment, it's more to entertain you. And so the algorithms and YouTube, and they figured out how to make the most money off of this. So I think that's the machine, as Jeremiah's talking about. So it's good to be detached. And in fact, you've made a good point that we're one of the key sources of depression and mental illness in our culture is when we look at the news too much. And we just let them kind of make money off of our attention. And this sort of distorted reality. So I think in that sense, it's a machine. Now, we have somewhat of a duty as educated citizens to like try to like watch the news or try to figure out what's going on, at least so we can like make decisions and vote properly and try to improve our society. Yeah, but yeah, that's a good thought. Getting back to what Tina said with the tragedy, like, yeah, the world is tragic, which is another way of saying like evil does a lot of stuff. Evil is very active. I mean, whether it's drug addictions or violence, sexual violence, you know, human trafficking, like it's like all over the place. I mean, it's kind of scary actually, and it's easy to get depressed when you start looking at all this stuff. But it's not the truth, because the truth is that I think what Jeremiah's like, there's so much good in the world, I guess. Is there? I think so. I hope so. And so in this Lord of the Rings story, it's moving towards a redemption story. Did we talk about the story charts? I think.
Yeah.
So it's more like, you know, you start off, if this is like a chart of existence, you start off kind of medium, then like a war happens and you lose, but then you fight back little by little, and then you kind of attain a sort of higher level through a redemption story. That's what's happening in Lord of the Rings. But in the meantime, like there's plenty of tragedy like out the wazoo that's happening that there's no shortage of. And you can get stuck in that. You can just kind of like, you know, get stuck there. Now, what Sam says is pretty wise, I think, and this might be, I'm going to try to connect this to what Tina said, like tragedy, because he says here, and he's talking about the stories, and if the characters in the story knew, we shouldn't know. Or if they had turned back. Because sometimes you can turn back and you're just like, I give up. I'm not going to fight against evil anymore. I'm just going to enjoy myself and play video games and eat pizza. Or Frodo could say, like, I'm not going to go into Mordor. I'm just going to like stay here. It's too hard. It's too hard to fight against evil. But if we keep going and we say, no, even though it's too hard, I'm going to keep going, then the story kind of goes on. And he says, we hear about those as just went on. And not all to a good end, mind you, at least not to what folk inside a story or outside it call a good end. So like, yeah, sometimes you get killed. Like in a story, like if you're in a war, like a lot of good guys die. Or if you're fighting against evil in your country, like, I don't know, South Africa, sometimes you fight against evil and you die. So sometimes you don't come to a good end, or you end up in prison, like Nelson Mandela. You know, coming home and finding things all right, though not quite the same, etc. But those aren't always the best tales to hear, though they may be the best tales to get landed in. And so, getting back to Tim's point, like there's a tragedy because like you might just end up dying in your fight against evil, or you might end up losing, like Nelson Mandela or other people fighting for good. Like there's a country, Ecuador. I don't know if you're following the news. Think about it. The news, like Ecuador has been kind of overrun by drug lords, drug cartels, like a lot of countries, unfortunately, in Latin America. And so they had an election, and this one good politician was like saying, "I'm going to crack down on the drug cartels. I'm this," and they killed him. I mean, the drug cartels killed him. So yeah, sometimes you're fighting against evil and you lose, but that's not a loss in the sense that like the story goes on. Like that was a self-sacrificing moment that leads to more good, hopefully, if people can kind of learn from that lesson. And so in the Lord of the Rings story, you know, some of these guys are gonna die, like Boromir dies, but that's not the end of the story. His brother's gonna carry on Boromir, Frodo's gonna carry on, and so forth. So, okay. So let me backtrack and let's talk about Boromir, because there's a lot we jumped over. And if you have any more thoughts about these things, please ask a question or raise a point. But let's just kind of summarize a little bit, just because there's so many things going on here. Because we had, you know, Frodo, Sam, and Smeagol at SS. They're walking through Mordor. They reached the Black Gate and they couldn't get in. So they go around. So they're going around and they run into this guy named Faramir and his men. Now, Faramir is the brother of Boromir. And Faramir knows that his brother's dead. And they tell Frodo and Sam, and eventually they catch Smeagol, that Boromir is dead. And in fact, well, just to kind of summarize it quickly, Faramir's men, they kill a bunch of other humans, kill some bad guys in the way, and these are people who are going to fight on the side of Sauron. They're also going after the power that Sauron is promising them, so he kills them. And that's when they see what they call oliphants. They got that, which means elephants. So Sam is happy when he sees the elephants, but in any case, those are the bad guys. They kill the bad guys, and the bad guys leave. And then Faramir is going to go back to his own people, and he's going to let Frodo, Sam, and Smeagol keep going. And that's when we get to this, when they talk about what tale are we in? That big question that we just talked about. Sorry, it's kind of messy. So that's the general order of events. But before we get to the end, let's look briefly at the scene where they're talking to Faramir. And yeah, so here's this is in this chapter called Of Herbs and Stewed Rabbit. And this is like that chapter where they're cooking rabbits, they caught some rabbits. So Boromir talks about Boromir. Boromir, all the men exclaimed, Boromir, son of the Lord Denethor, said Boromir. And a strange, stern look came into his face. You came with him? That is news indeed, if it be true. Know, little strangers, that Boromir, son of Denethor, was High Warden of the White Tower, and our Captain General. Sorely do we miss him. Who are you then? And what had you to do with him? Be swift, for the sun is climbing. Are the riddling words known to you that Boromir brought to Rivendell? Frodo replied, seek for the sword that was broken. In Imladris it dwells. The words are known indeed, says Boromir in astonishment. It is some token of your truth that you know them. Aragorn, whom I named as the bearer of the sword that was broken, said Frodo, and we are the halflings that the rhymes spoke of. We're the hobbits. That I see, said Boromir thoughtfully, or I see that it might be so. And what is Isildur's bane? That is hidden, said Frodo. Doubtless it will be made clear in time. So there's this poem, and this is part of the poem, that Boromir had been sent. And so the fact that Frodo knows this poem shows Boromir that he was with Boromir and that they were working together. And now they're trying to figure out what is Isildur's bane? Isildur's bane. Does anyone know what Isildur's bane is? That's the ring. So the ring of power is Isildur's bane. And Isildur is like the great grandfather of Aragorn, who had the ring before and was corrupted by the ring. So he was one of the humans who was corrupted by the ring. So Boromir is checking up on Frodo and Sam, and then there's this weird thing. I guess we're going to end with this, which is that Boromir. So when Boromir died, they didn't bury him. They put him in the elven boat and sent him down the river. Thinking like this is kind of like a proper death for a general, for a soldier. But because it was an elven boat, it didn't sink. It kept going, and it took the dead body all the way to Minas Tirith. So now Boromir saw his brother's dead body, or heard about his brother's dead body, and so he's saying like, how did his body come down? And so there's this magic that's not magic. It's the elven craft of the ship, the boat, was able to take the body all the way down the river. And they're trying to figure out like, how did that happen? And Boromir says, I broke off our speech together, said Boromir, not only because time pressed, as Master Samwise had reminded me, but also because we were drawing near to matters that were better not debated openly before many men. It was for that reason that I turned rather to the matter of my brother and let be Isildur's bane. You were not wholly frank with me, Frodo. You didn't tell me, he said, about Isildur's bane. I told no lies, and of the truth all I could. I do not blame you, said Boromir. You spoke with skill in a hard place, and wisely, it seems to me. But I learned or guessed more from you than your words said. You were not friendly with Boromir, or you did not part in friendship. You and Master Samwise, too, I guess, have some grievance. Now, I loved him dearly and would gladly avenge his death, yet I knew him well. Isildur's bane I would hazard that Isildur's Bane lay between you and was a cause of contention in your company. Clearly, it is a mighty heirloom of some sort. And so Boromir wisely is guessing that Isildur's Bane, there's some heirloom, there's something powerful, like a ring, that Boromir tried to get from Frodo. So he's guessing that like there was this fight, this argument between Frodo and Boromir. And so he's figuring this out. And so let me look ahead to the next chapters. So let's look at our thing here. And as I said, I might slow down a little bit because there's so many things to cover. But we today got all the way to the stairs of Cirith Ungol. I still might kind of go back and cover these things, but the next chapters are Shelob's Lair and the choices of Master Samwise. And does anyone know who Shelob is?
The spider.
It's the spider, but it's like a spider that's really, really, really big. So, and Tolkien had this thing about spiders, like there were like a lot of his like monsters are spiders. I guess maybe he was afraid of spiders anyway. So Smeagol is tricky. And even though Smeagol is helping them, he's thinking, hey, I want that ring. And so if I lead Frodo into Shelob's lair, and I don't tell Frodo that there's like a spider in there, but the spider's like humongous, it's like way bigger than a human. Maybe the spider will eat him and spit out the ring. So I'll get the ring. And so he's leading Frodo and Sam in there. And I mean, the good news is like, because there's a big spider there, the orcs are afraid of her. So there's no orcs there. So that's why they can get in. That's why they're able to climb the stair going up to Mordor. And there's this unguarded place because it's guarded not by the orcs, but by the spider. So the orcs don't mess with the spider because they know they're going to eat if they mess with the spider. So we're going to see what happens, and then what happens with Master Samwise's choice. So I won't tell you what happens, but they're going to run into this spider, and something's going to happen. And Samwise is going to have to choose. So stay tuned for that. And I guess just to wrap up, let me just say a few things about what we covered today, because where we have the machine, and as someone would say, like, machine both takes the form of power, it also takes the form of like the news, which is like this power-driven information source. Instead of being like a truthful source, it's kind of this distorted, twisted source that's kind of like a lie. And then we have our stories, and you and I are in a story, if you believe that. But I think that's the only way you can think of your life, I think, is as a story, as a narrative, as a mythos. And so, like Frodo and Sam, we can kind of step back for a second. It's like, I wonder what kind of story I'm in. Is there a great adventure possible for me? Is that where I'm going? Or is there not? Or maybe my life means nothing. Maybe nothing that even matters at all. I could just like sit there and do nothing, and nothing's going to matter. And many of the stories that we're told say that your life is nothing. It doesn't matter at all. Nothing that you do matters. I'm submitting that that's a lie. And that the truer story is in this book, Lord of the Rings, even though that's not literally a true story. But what these books do is they get us closer to the truth. Because like thinking about the wraith is when you're called to nothingness. And you're called to nihilism, where nothing matters. And nothing that you do matters. And like there's a certain freedom that can give you when you think that, oh, nothing that really matters, so I can just do whatever I want. And that's, you know, the consumer life. Like, it doesn't matter what I do, I'll just buy what I want and spend money on what I want, and I just get all this pleasure and joy from that. But I'm submitting that that's the wraith lifestyle. That's not true. Truth means confronting evil and facing it, and facing the challenges of our lives and saying, there's a great adventure here. And I'm going to choose that. And I'm not going to turn back. And I'm going to be more real by facing that reality. And so I'm hoping that I and you can kind of like absorb these stories from Lord of the Rings and from the other things that we're reading and get more in line with that truth, which is it's gonna be hard, and sometimes it's actually gonna defeat us. And maybe your life maybe you will fail in the sense that you want to attain what you're trying to get. But even in that effort and failure is a good, maybe a tragic good, like Tina was saying. But your life means something. And there's a certain danger in thinking like, well, it doesn't matter what I do, so I'll just do what I feel like. There's a more true idea in saying, not only does it matter what you do, you and I do, every single thing you do matters. Every single thing you do, every moment of your life matters, because you're either moving closer to the truth, closer to that challenge of goodness, or you're fleeing from it. You're fleeing into like fakeness and like infotainment. And these screens are sucking us in and destroying our brains and our lives. So, I mean, they're not just doing it, they're doing good too. Yeah, I use my phone. But let's use these stories like Lord of the Rings to nourish our stories and ourselves so that we can be kind of in the same story that Sam and Frodo are in. So, that makes sense?